Defense reimbursement, I explained that this is not their legal fees for something covered by the policy. If it's covered by the policy, we're paying your legal fees. There is no cap unless you're talking directors and officers, employee benefits, employment practices. Otherwise, there's no cap, meaning as long as the settlement hasn't gone above the limit, we'll pay the legal fees. A good example of this is sexual misconduct. We had a claim where church brought in a new pastor, it was a young pastor. One of the older ladies didn't like this new pastor for whatever reason. She accused him of inappropriately touching her. It became such a distraction that the pastor then resigned from his job and sued the lady. So now you have a lawsuit, countersuit, which creates all sorts of issues. The lady didn't want to drop her lawsuit while the other suit was out there. Meanwhile, Brotherhood paid for legal fees this whole time. Brotherhood ended up paying about $100,000 in legal fees, and we could have paid any amount because there's no cap on legal fees. So coming back to defense reimbursement, this is for things not covered by the policy. Examples of this would be I had a church with a cleaning service. Cleaning service wasn't doing a good job. They were doing whatever a terrible cleaning service does, and the church decided to break the contract. Breach of contract is not covered by insurance. However, if your customer is getting sued because of breach of contract, we will pay for some of the legal fees. In this case, it was small enough we just paid to settle it and move on with life. Other things we've had here, we've had property disputes where they're getting sued because they pulled out of a denomination. We've had criminal issues where the senior pastor's son was facing rape charges for something that happened on church property. We paid for some criminal defense for him up until the point where he either admits guilt or is proven guilty. At that point, there's no more coverage for him. And that's pretty standard across the board for insurance. As soon as you've been proven guilty or admitted guilt, you're not going to get covered by insurance because it's not here to cover things you intentionally did wrong or illegally. That's defense reimbursement. Directors and officers is coverage for the board. So if someone donated a bunch of money and they wanted a memorial garden built and the church instead used it to refinish the pews, and that person's estate came back and said you didn't use it for the specified purpose, there's that lawsuit against all the board members. That's what this covers. The one important thing to remember about directors and officers is if you don't have this coverage, the board members' personal assets are in play. So while we don't get a ton of directors and officers claim, the ramifications for not having the coverage are pretty severe. The church board member's house or car or any of his assets could be in play. Employee benefits is for any errors and omissions in the benefit plan. So if someone was supposed to get life insurance, let's say you hired them and they passed away somehow tragically in the next week before you got them added to the life insurance policy, this policy will pay for what they were supposed to get based on their employment contract. So any errors and omissions in the employee benefit plan. Employment practices is for any hiring and firing issues. Also covers sexual harassment in the workplace. So biggest claim I've seen on this was church got rid of a pastor and then explained to the whole congregation why they terminated this pastor. They then faced a slander lawsuit, and since it was employment related, it was employment practices. So hiring and firing issues or sexual harassment in the workplace are things employment practices covers. Fire and property legal, this is for if they rent a facility, they damage the facility and they get sued by the landlord. Usually it's a subrogation actually, but if they're getting subrogated against, this policy will pay for some of the damages that they caused to a rented facility. Non-owned and rented vehicle is for any vehicles used for the ministry's purpose, but they're not owned by the church. Owned vehicles, you write an auto policy. Non-owned vehicle means, let's say, they're organizing the youth group to go to a baseball game. They designate 10 parents to drive. People sign up to go with those 10 parents. One of the parents gets in an accident on the way. Anybody they hit and anybody who is being transported in that car, since the ministry asked them to drive, the church is now pulled into the lawsuit potentially. The driver's personal auto will be primary, but this policy will be excess. And if it's a really bad auto accident, you're gonna hit this coverage. The majority of Brotherhood Mutual's $1 million plus claims are vehicle related. It's a good thing to mention vehicle safety because a lot can go wrong really quick on the roadways. Most common claim or reason a church will get sued is slip and falls. If a church is asking, how can we prevent lawsuits? Slip and falls is the place to start. Moving on, rented vehicle physical damage. This is, they rent a van, they wreck the van. Physical damage is coverage for the van they wrecked. The rented vehicle liability would be for whoever they ran into. and it's rented vehicle physical damage. There's also $1,500 of loss of use or depreciation coverage included in that $60,000. Meaning they wreck a $30,000 van, they total it. We're paying $30,000 for that physical damage coverage to put in a new van. Hertz isn't able to rent the van out for 2 weeks because they've got to find a van, buy a van, all that stuff. The church is going to get charged for 2 weeks of not being able to rent out that van. Or if they say this van's not worth as much anymore, that's the depreciation. So you get $60,000 for the physical damage, $1,500 included for loss of use inside of that. Moving on, non-owned auto medical, that's same accident, it's a medical coverage, it's no fault. With the non-owned vehicle coverage and with the physical damage, it's important to know the difference between basic and broadened. You should be using broadened on most of your larger churches since it's higher limits, and if they're actually renting vehicles, you're going to want the broad form on there. If they're not renting vehicles, you can just throw the basic on there, but if they do rent vehicles, you'll want the broad form. What the broad form provides is it increases the physical damage coverage from $45,000 to $60,000, so they have extra coverage for the vehicle they wreck. That now includes $1,500 in loss of use. The basic form only includes $500 in loss of use coverage. So you get the extra physical damage and you get the extra loss of use coverage. So if they rent vehicles, you'll want to use the broad form. If they don't rent vehicles, I would still put the basic form on there. Relief activity is for any disaster relief type activities. It gives personal liability to the people serving on the disaster relief team. So if they fix up someone's house and it's shoddy workmanship and it causes the deck to collapse eventually, and they come back after the person who fixed it, there would be coverage for the volunteer. This relief activity coverage also increases your medical payments coverage by $50,000 and increases your wage loss by $10,000.